It's that time of year again, and many of us here in the Northern Hemisphere are starting to get our boats set up to get ready to be put away for the winter. Of course, unless you're one of those lucky Florida boys who's already probably typing in the comments, we don't end our boating season ever. Well, there's somebody else who doesn't typically end their boating season, and that's going to be the commercial mariner. That's right, the pros we see out there on the water. Now, we don't often think of them as winding up here on Boneheaded Boaters of the Week, but just like the rest of us, those crews make mistakes as well. So today we're going to focus on that, the commercial mariners and some of the boneheaded moves they'll wind up making out there on the water. But welcome back, crew, to this week's episode of Boneheaded Boaters of the Week. Now, as we mentioned, you don't typically think of the pros getting out there and making mistakes. I mean, take for example the professional tow captains. Those are the guys we expect to come out there and fix our mistakes after we make them. Or the old tug boys out there on the water. I mean, they spend so much time out there on the water helping direct big ships, they can't possibly make mistakes while they're out there. But the reality is, just like the rest of us, they're just human. And as humans, we are all susceptible to making mistakes once we get out there in the water. It doesn't matter if you're a professional captain or a professional Instagram model. If we get out there and spend a little time in the water, things are bound to go wrong. Now, one of the keys to this is how we respond to those things going wrong.
Good move, Captain. Good move. That's safe.
When things go wrong on the water, we want to keep a calm, cool head. We don't want to rush and try and make things happen that we don't need to happen. For example, let's say you're coming back into port, heading toward your dock, and you see a vessel's decided they're going to go ahead and take your spot. You've got a couple different options here. One, you can stay calm, cool, and collected, wait for that person to come back, and politely to ask them to move their vessel from your docking space. Or you can be like this guy and just go ahead and decide you're going to move the vessel for him. Or maybe you're out there cruising on the open ocean, plenty of space around you, plenty of room for all the vessels out there in the water, and all of a sudden that one guy decides he's going to go ahead and cross in front of your path, even though they have plenty of room around you. Of course, you can continue on your course, or maybe you can try and go ahead and get out of their way and do everything you can to avoid an accident, because that's one of the biggest rules out there in the water that many people forget sometimes. Sure, there are rules of the road, but one of the most important rules of the road, it is your responsibility at all times to do everything you can to try and avoid a collision. That's why we see so many times where people, even though they broke a rule of the road, both parties will wind up getting charged with at fault because both parties did not participate in trying to get the heck out of the way and avoid the accident. Now, of course, not all accidents can be avoided. I mean, if you're staying in port and a storm rolls in, well, then you're in trouble. And then, of course, there's the other accidents that happen out there on the water that really have nothing to do with the rules of the road. I mean, yeah, it's a car, so maybe you would think there's the rules of the road, but these pros show you that they're just out there to get a job done. It doesn't matter how they get it done. And speaking of getting the job done, there's a lot more jobs out there on the water than you possibly could think of. Kind of like this crew will show you here, where their job's to sell merchandise after they hook up to a cruising by vessel. This crew basically lassos on to a cruising vessel and then winds up selling t-shirts and other merchandise to tourists who pass by. They launch the merchandise up to the boat and the tourists drop the cash down to the vessel. And speaking of getting things done, nothing like those professional tow boys out there on the water trying to make sure everybody gets back in safe. And speaking of getting back in safe, this is one that I always remind you. If you are not a professional tow captain without a tow endorsement on your license and you do not carry the proper equipment on your vessel to tow somebody, I definitely don't recommend you do this. Now, I do know out there we've got a code on the water where if a mariner's in distress, we're supposed to help them. But the reality is help comes in many different forms. So for example, if you run across a disabled vessel out there in the water and nobody's in danger, it's probably best for your assistance to be maybe to hang out with them until a pro shows up to tow them. Because if you hook up and tow that vessel without the proper licensing, without the proper equipment, and cause damage to their boat, you as the captain can be held liable. That's why you should always leave this job to the pros. And speaking of the pros out there on the water, one thing you definitely don't want to do as well as a non-commercial mariner is put yourself in a situation where things could go wrong and you could cause harm to yourself or your vessel. Sure, you'll see people out there like this guy doing things that seem a little bit crazy, but the reality is if something goes wrong with this vessel during this situation, it's not going to be good for anybody. So just because you see the pros out there doing it doesn't mean you should get out there and try it as well. But thanks for watching, crew. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Boneheaded Boaters of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button.